In today's podcast, we'll be talking with Dizzy Maggs, an existential coach to creative men. We'll be exploring how her philosophies and experiences come together to inform her work. We'll also be looking at the relationship between the inner self and the outer world. So welcome back, Dizzy. This is our second time.
Take two.
Take two. We had a few technical issues at that time round, but it's great to have you back.
It's great to be here.
So I suppose it'd be really great to sort of start at the beginning and explore what brought you to coaching in the first place.
Sure. Well, basically, it was that I had my own major existential crisis probably about 5 years ago, and I think I went through my own process of self-healing through that, through relentless learning and getting appropriate support. And I think I became someone who was very knowledgeable about that, about that process, and wanted to share that with other people. Through a wisdom transmission, I suppose, and coaching felt like an appropriate modality for that.
So when you say existential crisis, what does that actually mean?
Well, maybe it's not that clear to explain, but I suppose it's a very, I see it as a natural phenomena. It's the need for the psyche to sort of recalibrate and reorganize and reset, I think, and that often takes the form of a breakdown of sorts. From another perspective, in tribal communities, let's say, you could see that there's a spiritual emergency and a spiritual emergent experience. It's viewed very differently in the West as some kind of dysfunctional experience, but of course, in other philosophies, it's very much, I suppose, a divine or spiritual process towards enlightenment.
So we could think of it as sort of a divine thing. We could think of it as a dysfunctional thing. How did you think of it at the time, and what do you think about it now?
Well, I think at the time, because we live in this, I live in the Western world, in this conventional consensus reality, you probably experience yourself with, the orthodoxy of science in the West is very, very strong, isn't it? So, it feels like you're sort of failing in terms of, being a human being in this realm, in the West, in, our capitalist culture, if you like, sort of not being able to function normally. So inevitably you feel like, oh, well, this is a failure of me being a human being. But I think having done a lot of learning, really, and explored all sorts of different perspectives, then, I arrived much more at a sense of that it was a spiritual sort of encounter. And I think a lot of people who have those experiences will look back on them and view them as possibly the best experience of their life, because it has made such a paradigm shift in their understanding of themselves, their understanding of the world beyond. It really is very significant, I think.
I suppose it makes me wonder about how do you bring that notion of that when we have these crisis moments or these challenging moments, how do you bring that into your coaching, in a sense of when you look back on this, the shift or change, or how differently you might see it?
Well, I think the existential approach is great in that it makes allowance for, a real spectrum of human experience. And so, including non-normative experiences, I think it really makes an allowance for that. So, and I think in practice, for me, it's much more of a philosophical line of inquiry.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense, that notion of we're just going to inquire around this and explore it, instead of label it as something as broken or needing fixing or whatever that might be, that label, but just kind of go, so let's explore this and see where it takes us.
Absolutely. And I mean, generally speaking, don't coach people in critical states, although in fact I was speaking with someone just, a day or two ago, and it was great to really be able to guide someone through that, to help them sort of feel grounded and safe, and then, hopefully still encourage them and, instill some hope and such things. But I've totally forgotten your question now.
I don't know if I had a question. But it's interesting you're saying that you don't coach people in those critical states. But I suppose my thought was about having gone through that experience. Sometimes there's stuff that we then bring to our coaching that either allows our clients to notice that in us, that we've experienced this, or we have a greater understanding of what it is that they're going through if they're in a challenging place. I recognise that some people come to coaching when they're sort of going, this was my life and now I don't want that to be my life, or my life has stopped being what it was and I don't know what to do next. And when we've had that experience or similars, it allows us to have a level of empathy that they can connect to, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I invite all sorts of experience. I would never pass any judgment on, if you want to come to a session and say, well, I've met with aliens, then I would be like, okay, well, tell me about that. To some people that would be like just way off track, but for some people that is a normative experience, and you have to be really mindful and respectful of that. And I think, not make a judgment and try from your perspective to understand it as best you can, and really make an allowance, because the human condition, well, it is a broad spectrum of experience, and some people experience the very edges of consensus reality, and some people, don't get anywhere near there. So you have to, have that kind of expansive appreciation, I think.
Okay, so what was your? So I know you've trained with Animas, and I'm curious about how that helped to inform your philosophy, but also what were the other things that sort of helped you or guided you to having such a philosophical or existential approach to the work that you do?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I mean, definitely, I did specifically the existential training with Nick, in fact, when I did my training. I don't know if you still do that.
So we sometimes do that weekend. Nick doesn't deliver it so much nowadays.
Okay.
Yeah.
So definitely for that just felt like sort of coming home for me. And I think, I'm a bit of an armchair philosopher anyway, and yes, my own, breadth of life experience. Also, I'm a Buddhist practitioner, so I think there's I think I bridge the gap between the intellectual and the spiritual quite well. I have that kind of range as well, and a language for that range of experience, which I think is useful too.
So how did you sort of get to coaching? How did you find coaching?
So how did I find Animas? How did I make that connection? Or
yeah, I suppose there is the Animas connection, but did coaching, so with some of the people I've spoken to, they had a coach, and that was what brought them to the thing, and or some of it have heard of coaching and then kind of explored it. And I'm curious about what was your journey around that?
Well, I definitely had sort of, classical therapy, like counselling type therapies before, but I'm much less interested in the retrospective, sort of personal histories. I know that always is relevant, in a coaching session. You do, that does inform, what we're experiencing now typically. So that, we do reference that, but generally speaking, it's much more present focused and forward looking. And I think I'm much more inclined towards that way of working and processing. And also, I think, generally speaking, it's my experience of men that they're more inclined to not look back so much. They sort of seem much more to sort of accept the past as it is and want to move forward. So that's quite interesting, but it's definitely my experience.
Okay, so I want to come back to that notion of men, but I just want to follow the thought of then did you through your therapeutic experiences go, right, I want to become a therapist or a coach or a person that works with people, or
I think it was really, it's a number of variables. I also, the importance of lifestyle, and if you're someone who's had quite major life experiences, there is quite a conditional nature to your life, and certain things have to be in place for you to be really well in this world. I mean, I think that's the case for most people, but a lot of people don't have that privilege or the desire to create that. But I really wanted, having had this major life experience, I really wanted to, I really believed it was possible to live my ideal life. I really believed that, there was magic and wonder and beauty and happiness to be had for me, and I wanted that. So it was also a response to a need for a certain lifestyle. And I'm someone who travels a lot. I wanted to be, very much autonomous in my work. I've worked as a freelancer for many, many years. And so it just kind of felt right, and for lots of different reasons,
So what it feels like I'm hearing there is that coaching matched the way that you wanted to be in the world. That there was something about being a coach that allowed you to travel, to have your needs met, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's, I feel a call of duty, if you like, to create value. I think that's quite a Buddhist appreciation, but there's definitely a sense of, wanting to make a contribution. And I think, that is quite typical of someone who's been through major life, internal sort of processes, is that you move from this place of introspection. Once you transcend your suffering, essentially, you move from that place of introspection to a more outward-looking gaze. I think that's quite typical. And so a sense of, making a conscious contribution and creating value is definitely very pertinent for me. And that is also part of the reason that I coach.
So you said there, when you transcend your suffering, and that felt like a very Buddhist thing to say, and I just sort of thought, I wonder how much of that sort of the notion of you being a Buddhist shows up in your coaching, or how that shows up in your coaching, I suppose.
Sessions are non-denominational. There's, people can ask me about, if they were interested in Buddhist philosophy, then I would respond. But generally, outside of a session, but I think, is it a values thing? Maybe, that sort of, wanting to instill hope and encourage, and really have a depth of compassion and hopefully wisdom, and very much, and this is very existential too, which is why sort of Buddhism and existentialism works well for me. Maybe that's quite a unique combination, perhaps not, but that personal responsibility is such a massive factor in both Buddhist philosophy and in existentialism. The power absolutely exists within you. There's no God or deity. There's nothing beyond, essentially. It is you that is the determinant of one's own life. How you experience it, how you define it, that's all you.
That's really interesting to hear how those things sort of fit together, and around that sort of person-centered way of thinking, that the client is in control of their own life, and the client is in control of the choices and the decisions that they make. And as a coach, you create the space where they can reflect on those choices, decisions, those values, those beliefs that sit behind what they want to do, or what's stopping them from doing that. So I'm sort of, it's making my brain kind of buzz and tingle and kind of go, okay, so there are some beautiful lines being drawn together.
Something just mentioning person-centered, there's a great little excerpt of Carl Rogers I was reading the other day, in that wonderful book, I don't know if you read it, On Becoming a Person, and he says that the task of psychotherapy is the task of dealing with a failure in communication. And I think, very much what we're doing as coaches is recovering that. It's about the internal system of communication, and also how we communicate in the world. I think there's something very significant in that. Definitely healing people is about, clearing this interference that we have, and really recovering that sense that we're able to communicate well with, that we have that unity of self, and that we can unite with other that's a reality and a possibility.
It's really interesting having this conversation with you, and that sort of the breadth that you take on as a coach, and talking about healing, whilst also talking about having making your own choices and supplying hope and possibility. I recognise that some coaches would see that as not coaching.
Quite possibly. I suppose for me, it's about, I typically coach creative men. That's my niche, if you like, and I think for creative people, what they like to do is explore. They appreciate something that's very exploratory and free-flowing, and that's not limiting. I think if you try and coach me as a creative person, in a formatted or formulaic way, well, that just really doesn't work. I really switch off quite immediately to that. But if you allow me to just, sort of, I was going to say dialogue, but you're not really in dialogue because I'm just sort of expressing myself, but you allow me to be just fully expressed and freely expressed, I think, that is really where the magic happens for me, because you're creating a space that, and a context that most people never encounter, to be able to be, fully expressed with no judgment. It's just really allowing for that. And I think again, the philosophical line of inquiry sort of meets well the needs and nature of a creative mind, and the existential approach too. It's really holistic. It's very broad ranging, and many.
So I'm really curious about these creative men that you work with, and how you find them. And I know that your website has a particular quality to it that may be part of creating that sort of attraction or relationship.
Oh, definitely. It's one part of it. I mean, I try to, create an aesthetic that is authentic to me, but I think that creative people do see through prisms of, idealism, aesthetics, they're very sensorial, they have those sensibilities. So I suppose it's about, trying to attract that, but it's not really a marketing strategy. It's just me being me, and that's how I express myself through a particular design aesthetic. And my background is in fashion and film, and so I perhaps bring some of that to it. And in fact, also in answer to this question, how I sort of meet my clients is typically that I still very much engage in those sort of cultural circles. I mean, I coach film directors or contemporary artists. I mix in those circles because they interest me and because I work in them. And I think it really feeds into my ability to coach, to be in dialogue with creative people for a good amount of my time. I think it's hugely stimulating, and it definitely feeds into what I have to offer.
Yeah, so it's that kind of living in the world in which you're working in. And, when we become removed from that, so when we're not, if our clients are all into fitness and we're not, or we're not in that world, sometimes there can be a discord or a disconnection between the language. But if you're in that world, then they can understand you, you understand them, you have a sense of belonging almost, that kind of comes from all of that.
Absolutely. And I think, what's quite unique as well to creative people is that the product of their works is such a direct extension of themselves, so there's this sort of added dimension, which I think is quite interesting as well. So
how does that show up for you, that notion of, as a creative, your work is also sort of an extension of you? As a creative, the work that you do as a coach, how does that feel in terms of an extension of you?
Because I guess it's just who I've always been in my life. I have always been that sort of go-to person. I clearly seem to sort of invite it, people, even new people, will sort of download onto me. I don't know if it must be an energetic thing, or also a desire to embrace people in being empathic and understanding. Maybe there's something they sense that in me, but tell me again the question.
So it's
I
just
go
that,
off on a tangent and I'm like, what?
it's like the creative mind that things, our thoughts are stimulated and we bounce all over the place. I recognise for myself, I suppose I'm still a creative, but having been in the sort of the theatre world for a long time, that part of what used to work for me was being around different people that created stimulation of different thought. So having one track was always really difficult because you were always kind of all over the place, and then seeing where is all of this different information, how does it coalesce, how does it sort of come together. I think my question was about the extension of self. So
as a coach,
yeah,
that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yes, because I think I've always been that person. So it's almost a second nature to me to coach people, directly or indirectly. And I think it's a language thing as well. I mean, these themes that I talk about are things that are of genuine interest to me. And I think, really, it's absolutely my belief that the inner reform of the individual equals, peace in the world. I think that there's such a, we're all interconnected, and I'm fascinated by, the limitless potential of the individual related to the whole.
Tell me a bit more about that. Tell me more.
Because I think that our inner state of life is typically reflected in our environment, and the way that we transform the outer world is by having a real reformation or revolution within. And I think so if we're building peace within, that inevitably builds peace without. If we're someone who has arrived at transcended suffering and has arrived at a state of peace and presence, then our interactions with other people are significantly better. Again, unity of self, unity with other, harmonious relationships, I think, and then that just permeates through your entire life, private life, working life, and beyond. It's significant.
So these creative men that you're working with, and you're bringing all of this sort of, I suppose, understanding to your craft, to the coaching that you do with them, or the work that you do with them, I suppose. What is it that they're bringing that you meet them with to explore?
Oh, it can be really anything. It could be a challenge with creativity itself. Maybe having a writer's block, for example, that would be a classic one. It might be something like that. But I mean, more typically than not, people think they're coming about something quite unique, or that they're really, that it's only them, and that, no one else experiences this. I'm having a really, really tough time with this. And in fact, I think most people come with exactly the same universal sort of experiences that are the kernel of their suffering. I think people can present with, quite a surface challenge, but then if you kind of, after a bit of dialogue, you're like, oh, so it's, and it comes back to something much more fundamental. And I think it's why I love existentialism, I think, is because it really distills, very grand themes into something accessible, which is really grounding, I think, particularly for creative people who can be, away with the fairies or what have you.
Yeah, it's always really interesting how I suppose as humans we think that we are having a very individual experience, and although we are, often the challenges that we're having when we kind of drill down, there are universal challenges. We're all wrestling with those things, but we just feel that we're doing it on our own. And there's something wonderful about being in a coaching relationship to notice that I'm not on my own. This isn't just my stuff. This is what's happening in the world, and I'm just experiencing this in this moment right now. So what are your plans, and where do you go with this?
Well, I guess, in some sense I've got no idea, because you don't know what the future holds, but I'm getting quite interested in teal organizations. Do you know about teal
Tell
organizations?
me a bit more about that.
It comes from Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the teal strata is about, and particularly referencing business, it's about purpose-driven business, considering the humanitarian approaches to business, essentially. and they're generally self-organising. And I'm quite interested in that at the moment. I'm not saying I would necessarily work in those organisations, but perhaps taking a company from where they are at as a non-teal organisation into a teal organisation. I think that's quite interesting to me. But I think I'll always be engaged in creative industries. I'm penciled as a creative director for a film next year, and I still work in high fashion. I'll probably continue to do that for some time, just because I love being in those environments too, and I think it all feeds into my coaching. But and I think there is just no end to my fascination with the human condition. I don't think that will ever change. The meeting of minds is just my absolute favourite encounter. And each is novel. And I think even if you're, coaching someone weekly over a protracted space of time, each encounter we have within that can be completely sort of remote and different from the last. And I really, I love that sort of novelty. I think I'm someone who needs a high level of stimulation. I get bored quite quickly. And I think generally with people, there's always something more or another layer or dimension. And I think that's just fascinating.
It's really interesting. So sometimes when I'm working with coaches, especially new coaches, who have this thing of, so I did this with my client in that session, so what do we do next? And have this idea that there is going to be this steady progression, and sometimes we have these conversations where that may never happen. What our client's working on now, but that may be dealt with or gone or forgotten by the next session, or something else might be more important or appearing in that moment, and not to get caught in that loop of it's going to go like this, because we just don't know where that's going to go. So I'm just thinking, somebody's watching this and they're sort of fascinated by how you think and how you work and your approaches and the various industries that you're involved in, and they're going, but how do I do that? How do I access that? Are there any sort of key thoughts or people that you go, these are some key things that enabled me to be where I am right now?
So are you talking in terms of people who want to coach in the way that I coach, or people who are potential clients? So I make that clear.
Coach. Want to coach, want to work in the way that you work,
I don't know. I think have an insatiable curiosity. I think I'm a relentless learner. I just, I want to learn. I find that that really amplifies my energy always. So I think, learn about the things that interest you. I think that's such a fault of our educational system, is that people are taught things that a lot of the time they're not interested in, so they simply don't learn. I only realized that I loved learning, in fairly recent years, when I started engaging in the things that actually interested me. And now you just can't, get the book out of my hands. It's really like that. And I think, so definitely, relentless learning. I think always, as much as possible, try and be an authentic expression and version of you. I think the more we do the things that make us us, even though a lot of those things are external that we essentially identify with, so they're not really us, but they sort of are. I think the more we do the things that make us us, I think that's an advantage as well.
When you talk about the things that make us us, what might those things be?
You can ask me a question.
So what makes you you? Maybe that's a better question. What are the things that you do
existential question
to make you you?
Oh, goodness me. I guess my own artistry. I mean, I write a lot. I'm a writer. So I suppose my own creative expressions, really, because, those things just, I think creativity for people is compulsive, it really is a sort of compulsion. It almost like flows through you. Sometimes you don't feel in command of it at all. I'm sure you'll, connect with that. So my own creativity, I suppose that the things that I engage in lifestyle-wise, I love the great outdoors, I love traveling, I love just being in dialogue. I think, that's another answer to an earlier question about why do I coach, is because just being in dialogue is my favorite thing. I just want to be in dialogue. And because it's such a transmission of, learning and teaching, again, this is this opportunity to learn more. It's a great opportunity. What makes me me?
I think one of the other things
another day.
that makes you you is that richness of experience. I think.
Of course, it is, Rob. And you can't dismiss it or delete that, despite the fact that it's largely history. I mean, I'm also someone who lost a parent when she was in her teens. I've had a lot of challenging life experiences that I've moved through and hopefully learned a lot through, and those things, of course, inevitably they change you. So, I definitely have some good strategy. I'm definitely selling that, a good strategy for recovery. I hope that I'm at some point a shining example of the power of a desire to come to thrive and that inspire people to, persevere, I think. Sometimes we can feel so defeated, but, you really have to persevere. You really have to persevere in life and surround yourself by great people. An answer to that earlier question about, how do you get where you are? I think surround yourself with people who, inspire you, who you can learn from, but also who amplify you. With certain people, you have this amazing energetic experience, and I think the more you can be in those environments, the better it is for you.
Brilliant. That's great. I think there's some real sort of nuggets there about how do you be you, how do you be your authentic you, and in order to move forward and be a great coach. And I sort of think part of that being a great coach is having great learning, and so that desire to learn, I think, is such an important thing that we don't stop learning. We've got to keep learning and exploring and expanding our mind and our vision.
And I definitely think that's creative people are like that. They sort of like to almost exist at the very edge of consensus reality, just because that they have this insatiable curiosity. They have this need for the new. That they're at what I refer to as the chaos point. Of the new. That's where innovation happens. That I'm so frustrated how we. How the arts and humanities, particularly in education, are being so diminished, because, it just seems laughable when you think about how, all culture, music, art, architecture, that is all a product of the creative mind and innovation, and, creative people are progressive and visionary and pioneering, and that we dismiss those. Well, of course, it's because, presumably without being too political, that, it encourages independent thought. But who doesn't love culture? I mean, I think we need that to, it's just so essential to me.
So when you think about your coaching and your experiences and the way that you work, how do you sort of see that as sort of coming into the world and having an impact on the world?
I definitely feel very strongly about creating a sustainable future, if you like. I have little people in my life, and I want them to have a wonderful experience of the world and the planet and their entire lives. But I think we definitely need to develop our emotional intelligence. Our intelligence is generally, we need to become much more sophisticated. And, I think something that is quite unique of, not all creatives, but a lot of creatives, is they push the boundaries in this sense. They want to innovate, they're progressive and visionary, they're pioneering, and also in a lot of those fields now, environmental fields, that art itself, if you like, is a means and modality of expression, that people are being, more fully expressed. But definitely what I spoke about before, about how, I'm concerned with individual, social, collective, global healing, and I think this absolutely starts with the inner transformation of the individual. And I think, many thought leaders and many philosophies, if you like, that is their belief, and I think we need to attend ourselves more and really take responsibility for the inner state of our life. I think that's crucially important. I feel very strongly about that, for sure.
So it feels that part of me feels like you're like almost a campaign for a better world or a better being. And is there any move for that? Or is there like do you sort of see yourself as that, or is that just my sort of projection of you?
No, I think definitely there is. Yeah, we were talking earlier about, conscious activism, and I see that coaching is certainly my expression of that. I feel like it's a way that I can contribute to the greater whole. I hope that I do.
It's been absolutely fascinating speaking with you today. If people want to sort of find out more about you or connect with you, where would they go? How would they find you?
Yes, well, my website is www.dizzymags.com, and I'm also just started writing on Medium, so you can follow my blog posts there. And that's pretty much it. And my number's on my website. You can call me or write to me, and I'd love to speak with you.
Brilliant. Been wonderful. Thank you so much, Dizzy.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.